So, Hunter and I just wrapped up a little bit more of what I just talked about a second ago. As I said, I'm still making decisions and I'm trying to figure out how I want this to work, although we did just discuss something that I hadn't put much thought to, but now I'm kind of contemplating it. But that will, once I make my decision, that will be for next week. But, that being said, this week is our first week of repetition. I want to give you guys a basic understanding of how repetition in programming and in Java works, the idea behind iteration, and a new control structure called while loops, where you do something while a certain condition is true. So in my notes, I create examples, and I don't always read through them. So if this kind of falls apart, we'll see how this goes. When you were taught to count on your hands as a kid, you were always adding by 1. Okay. You start with none, and then 1, 2, 3, and so on, raising a finger each time to indicate a new number. You can think of repetition and iteration in this way. Incrementing, or decrementing, obviously you could count down with your fingers as well if you wanted to, your way to a set of numbers until you reach a certain number. For your hands, the objective was obviously to reach 10. For programming, it is heavily dependent on what you are trying to accomplish. There are so many spelling mistakes in that. Like, just words that I had forgot, like dependent, I wrote depend. Just, but anyways. And you don't necessarily have to repeat by iterating through a number as either. You could also wait until a certain condition. So, like, an example of this would be you're eating an apple. You continue to eat the apple until the apple is gone. You cannot continue to eat the apple once the apple is gone.
Or determine the apple is done.
What?
When do you determine the apple is done?
Well, that varies from person to person. Personally, I determine the apple to be done when I bite into the core and start choking on seeds. Some people do eat the core, but it varies from person to person.
I really wasn't intending on that being a serious question. I'm glad you carried through it.
Yes, yes. And these conditions that we can create are the same sort of deal as the conditions that we could have created with if statements. It's the same idea, the same stuff works, and or and not, true and false. It's all the same wrap-rolled piece. And I give another example here. Another way to think of it is like this. While your homework is not done, keep working on homework. Now, granted, what determines your homework being done varies from homework to homework, but as a programmer, that is what you have to figure out. What determines this piece of code as being done so it doesn't have to repeat anymore? Now, I'm going to show you an example right off the bat here, and I didn't actually get fully set up apparently. But I'm going to show you an example right off the bat here of what it would look like, if I could grab a hold of this here, what it would look like if you wanted to count up like you were counting with your fingers in Java. So let me get my boilerplate stuff here. Alright, so the first thing that we do is we need an index variable. In this case, I'm going to use the variable name I. You could use the word index, whatever you want. It really depends on what you're doing. Now, in this case, we're going to talk about while loops. There are other types of loops in Java, and we'll only be talking about 2 in this class. But while loops continue while a condition is true. Okay? So while a particular condition is true, the code inside of a while loop will repeat. So in this case, we're going to say while, and then we're going to put parentheses. While I is less than or equal to 10, and then we're going to put brackets. Okay? So that is the generic structure of a while loop. That is how all while loops will work. Whatever comes after the word while in the parentheses is your condition. In this case, we're just checking to see if I is less than or equal to 10. And if it is, then we're going to do the code that's in this block. Okay? Now, in this case, we're going to say system.out.println I, and then we're going to say I++. Now remember, the plus plus means that we're going to add 1 to that number, that variable. So each time the loop goes through, each time it comes around, we are going to add 1 after we print whatever number we're currently on. So how many numbers, Hunter, I'm asking you, will we see when we run this program? Keeping in mind where we start from and what our condition is. We start at 0, and the condition is I less than or equal to 10. How many numbers will get printed? Think of it this way, how many lines, because we're using print line. It's print line. Nothing?
No.
All right. Well, let's see what happens when we run the code. Make a little bit more sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So basically what happens is we start with 0. 0 is less than or equal to 10, so that's true. So that means we come in here. So we print I, which is 0, on its own line, and then we add 1. So now I is 1. So we come back up here. 1 is less than or equal to 10. Okay, so that's true. So then we go on. We print 1. We add 1 to 1, which is 2, and then we keep going until we reach 10. Okay? Make sense?
Yeah.
All right. So that's a very basic example, and you'll see that more often than not as one of the very general examples that's given when you're first learning how to use loops in Java. And we'll see different versions of this when we talk about loops next week. But just to go over a little bit of terminology, I is actually our iterator variable. It is our index from which we count up or down from. Now, one question that I have for Hunter to see if he can answer this. What happens if I do this? Okay. How long does the program run for? What is our condition? If it's less than or equal to 10. So how long does the while loop run? Forever. This is something that I try to demonstrate. It's very easy in programming to create something called an infinite loop. If I were to let's look and see what happens.
Oh boy.
So I go like this, and I run the program. You see the little blue bar start up, and if we go to the terminal, it's just chugging, and it's going to keep chugging. I mean, This will stop when we hit the integer wall, which is negative 2.14 billion. Now, I am not going to sit, it's going pretty fast, but I don't know that I'm going to sit here for the next, we're already at about 3 million. We've still got another, we still got another 2,000 million to go, roughly. So I don't think we're going to sit here and wait for that. But you can see the program just keeps going. It's not going to stop unless we tell it to stop. And that is a problem, and it does come up in programming, and it may come up in robot programming as well. You've got to be careful how you set up your conditions to make sure that at some point your condition will not be true anymore. Otherwise, you'll just keep going forever and ever and ever until something breaks. In which this case, we could sit here for probably hours, and this would not ever stop. So let me, by the way, if you ever hit an infinite loop, you can push this little button down here and it will reload your virtual machine and stop anything that's running, which is handy. So I'm just trying to look through what I had written. This week's actually going to probably be pretty short, because I just don't have a whole lot of content. But let's take a quick look at the opposite direction. So let's say that I starts at 10. Okay. We can then say while I is greater than or equal to 0, print, and then we'll subtract. Okay? So then let's, oops, I pushed the wrong button. Same sort of idea. We run the program, except this time our numbers are going in reverse. What you would use this for is probably not extremely clear at this point. We do have a section of the class that is on something called arrays. Arrays are how you can aggregate a bunch of different variables into one group. We're still a couple of weeks away from that, because I do want to get through all of repetition before we talk about arrays. And arrays aren't used as much in robot programming. At least, I shouldn't really say that. They're useful in robot programming, but a lot of what I've seen teams do, they don't make use of them, or they don't make use of them in a effective manner. But that's besides the point. Either way, unless Hunter has some questions, we're actually going to pause here for a minute, and we're going to move on to the next section after we're done. We're really not that far from being done for this week. I only actually have 2 pages of notes for this week, because I broke repetition down so much, because it can be kind of a funny thing to try and learn. But we're gonna talk about loops and strings next, because your assignment for this week will have to do with strings and making use of loops with strings, because you're going to be creating a simple password system. But that being said, we're gonna stop for a minute, because it doesn't seem like Hunter has any questions, and we'll move on here in a minute.